Okay, welcome to Promises. Um, you probably recognize something like this. Last week we did a lot of Postgres, PSQL stuff in Node, where we set up a pool and we do some database queries. And we probably remember doing something like, we'll take a query, call it SQL equals, and I'll just put some database query in here, select ID, name, from, and I've got a table called widgets that is actually part of the, I'll just say GIP5, just in case. It's part of the seeds they give you in the midterm skeleton. That's one of the tables that we have in there. So I've got some SQL and I can do some Postgres. And notice I've included my PG library. PG is a promise-based library. And really there's two parts to promises. There's making promises and there's using promises. Fortunately, in JavaScript, we spend easily 99% of our time using promises and very little of it writing our own promises. You probably remember the little final quiz they had. It was a while ago where they had to build a promise. We don't do that very often in JavaScript. Thank goodness, because they're not that easy. We won't be covering a lot of that today. Maybe at the end we'll talk about making promises again, but honestly, it's not something you do a lot of because we simply use packages such as PG that are promise-based, and we simply use those promises. All right, so you probably know that to make a query from my database, I would go, let's do this. Let's try this first. We'll go const query equals, then I'm going to go pool, because I've created a pool here already in my PG. I've got a new pool. I'll say pool dot query with my SQL and see what I get. There we go. And let's log our query. I should call it, yeah, query is fine. Okay, let's run this and see what we get. And as you can see, I get a promise pending. That's because the query function in PG returns promise. It is a promise-based module. So if you call it directly, you will get a promise, which means it'll say, yeah, okay, I'll go ahead and do that, but it doesn't do it yet. You've essentially put in an order for a query, and the query function says, okay, I'll get to that, and it returns immediately. You probably remember from doing your second interview that JavaScript does not stop or pause for anything. When you go into an asynchronous function, it returns immediately. So pool.query immediately returns to line 14. So line 11 does not pause at all. It returns immediately, and I get line 13. In fact, if I even put some code here, I can put, let's prove that to ourselves. We'll go start of my code, like that. And let's put an end of my code there. Okay. So right now, I'm still inside my code. I get a promise. Now, as we know, we can't use a promise this way. We have to do something else to it. We have to use the typical then pattern of accessing a promise. So really, this thing's not returning a query. It's returning a promise to me. So that's really what I'm getting. I'm getting a promise back. So when I actually log my promise, I'm getting a pending promise. So let's use our promise. We're going to promise dot, and as you all know, it's dot then. That is how we get stuff out of a promise. Now, of course, a then like that doesn't do much. It simply calls then. We have to give it a callback function that it will execute for us when it completes our query. And typically we use something like res or data. I'm going to use res because it's very commonly used in certainly in the databases and other things as well. So res, and it wants a function. So there we go. Now my res, my then has a function. And I can do anything I want in that function. So I will console log. Now, of course, I'll console log my res, I suppose, and we'll see what I get. So now what's happened is this. I've put in an order for a pool.query, which immediately returned, but I told it when you're finished, let me know, and it does that by calling its then function. So the then gets called when my promise ends. Okay, let's give that a try. There we go. Start of my code, end of my code. Look at that. So it blew right past this and simply went right to the end. And as you all know, the event loop in JavaScript, when JavaScript wasn't busy anymore, then it got around to handling things like completed promises and callbacks. And that's how JavaScript works, right? When it's busy, it's not going to be interrupted. JavaScript is what's called non-preemptive, which means it will not stop what it's doing in between two lines and do other stuff. It will execute all these lines of code right till the very end. And only when it has nothing else to do, then it will start looking around for stuff to do, like handling promise thens or doing callbacks, asynchronous callbacks. Okay, so far this is fairly straightforward. We have our then. Now, of course, in Postgres, our PG library, our res is pretty big. And we know that we have res.rows because we've done this all week. We've got our res.rows is what we actually get back. So let's call this again. There we go. Okay, in fact, I'm going to just, everyone loves my retro Windows screen here. So it's actually not Windows XP, it just looks like it. Okay, so there we go. So that is res.rows. And I get back an object. I get back an array of row objects from my query. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. I've called my res.then here, but in actual fact, the promise or the execution of my query, that started here. That's a very important point to remember, that the promise starts running right there. It doesn't start running when you do the then on it. It runs there. And I can prove that by doing this. I can actually then that same promise a couple of times. If I do that, it only ran the query once. I can run then as many times as I want on that same promise. It doesn't affect anything. It's not going to run that query again. It's simply just going to say, well, what's in that promise? Oh, that's what's there. Really, the then reads what is inside the promise, the results of the resolved promise. So a lot of people sometimes think that this is when things happen. It's not. The promise starts going immediately. You probably heard the term or the phrase that JavaScript is single-threaded, and it is. It only runs one thing at a time. But your computer is not single-threaded. You probably got 2, 4, 8, 16 cores in your computer, and it's preemptive. It's probably written ultimately in C, which is running on a preemptive multitasking OS, which means it can do lots of things at once. So you put that order in for a query, that started immediately in your system. It might even have got finished before it even got to here. But of course, JavaScript can't do anything until its code is done. So it doesn't queue up an order. It actually starts running that query right there. And theoretically, if you had a lot of code going on here, maybe it even got finished by the time before it got to the end of the program, but nothing's going to get noticed until JavaScript has finished this code. In other words, end of my code, then you'll get your results. Okay. So let's talk a bit about other stuff then. We've got a promise that we can then get information of. Generally, what you oftentimes do, and we did this in our last week's project, is we have a function that returns a promise. Now, right now, I've got pool.query. What I really want is I want to write a function. I want to call it get widgets, for instance. And I want my own function that returns widgets. That way I can hide all of these details from my main code. And we've done this before. So let's make a little function. We'll call it get widgets, get widgets. Great. And don't need parameters. And all it's going to do is really the same thing. We'll take our query here. Let's put that inside there. Okay. And we're going to really just call our promise. We'll go pg or pool.query. And we'll call it SQL there. So we have a promise. Let's make a promise here. Const promise, just to be consistent with our other code. There's our promise. Now, what our function will return is going to be a promise. So let's return the promise. Here we go. So now our function returns a promise. And this is the kind of thing we did in our project last week, is returning promises from our function. Okay, so let's call our function. Now, got our const, and we'll call it, well, promise again. Why not? Well, as I said, we're going to start off pretty slow with promises to go through them kind of step by step. Let me know if I'm going too slow. Okay, equals, and now I can do get widgets. There, get widgets. Oops, too much. Okay, and if I log my promise here, I should get back, and I did, I got back a pending promise. So once again, I have to do the same thing. On my return from my get widgets function, I have to do a then. It's a promise. There is this term, it's called thenable. That's actually a thing. It's called thenable. That means it's a promise and you can do a then on it. So they made up this word in JavaScript, and there's a bunch of them that are kind of funny. It's thenable. This is a thenable object. So I will do the same thing. Promise.then. There. And my result, same pattern. There we go. I'll put my console log, my let's do res.data for now. Let's add our start and finish of our code to be there. Okay. Because it's not data, it's res.rows, right? Here we go. The res object you get back, remember, is always tied to what particular mod. Yeah, good. Rows, exactly. The object you get back inside your res is tightly tied to the module you're using. So in PG, res is going to have .rows. In other libraries, we'll be using a little very shortly here, it's not always .rows, it's res something else. So this part will always be tied to whatever library you're using. Oh, the question is, we haven't using promises, we're just using .then. Ah, sure. There's no difference actually. All I've done is I've taken the promise, and we don't normally do it this way in two steps. We would normally go get widgets.then. I can call this, my promise there, or my results there. That's just a variable name. I've broken it into two steps just to demonstrate that that's just a promise. You get a promise back and you can .then it. We would normally do something like this, wouldn't we? But I've just broken it into two sections or two steps to make life easy. Oops, there we go. So this promise is just a variable where I put that promise and then I can .then it. The reason I did that is so I can demonstrate that we can .then the same promise a couple of times and it retrieves the same data from the promise. So there we go. So there is our function that returns a promise, and a promise is an object. It is actually a JavaScript object I'm getting back. And that promise object is thenable, which means I can query it more, not necessarily a database query. I can interrogate it, if you will, for its content. And if I do 2.thens on the return from my promise, I will get data twice, but it only runs once. So that promise, that get widgets only ran one time, and then I thenned it a few times. Okay. So let's talk about what happens when we return something from a then. So right now, we're not doing anything with that promise, are we? We're just passing it through. We didn't do anything. You'll probably remember this week, we actually did a then on this, didn't we? Instead of promise equals pool.query SQL, we actually did something with the promise, didn't we? We returned .then. So, and this is a really important point. To do a dot, let's put a .then. I'll do this here. In fact, why don't we do it this way to make it the more common way? Turn. So as we can see, this is exactly the same thing. I just use oops, there. I can do it that way, or I can say return this instead and not use that intermediate variable. Now I think we can agree this is really exactly the same thing. This, oops, is the same as that. We're just not using that temporary variable promise. Okay, so I can do a .then here. And this is how we do it quite often, or very commonly. We indent the next line and go .then. That's the standard way of representing a promise with a .then. Okay, so I've got my .then here. Now what I can do is I can return something from my .then. And if I return something from my .then, let's watch what happens. Let's do it here. Promise.then. Like we'll do it this way too, just to make it promise.then. Console log res.rows. Let's chain another then onto that. Let's talk about how we chain promises together. We'll do a .then again. Okay, so now I've chained this promise with two thens, but now it's not a separate then on the same promise. Now I'm essentially running promise.then and then .then on that .then. So it seems a little funny, but we're just chaining these .thens together. So now instead of two promise.thens, I'm actually chaining the thens, .then, .then again. This is called chaining promises or chaining .thens. And the really key takeaway from today, one of them is about three I want to have you take away today, but I want you to really know that when you return something from a .then, it becomes available to the next .then. Good question, Tessa. Is the res in both of these thens the same? Awesome question. Wow, you set me up perfectly for my next example. Let's check that out. So here we go. Let's console log res again. There, let's console log the res, just so we actually can see the whole res. So we got res.rows there. Let's console log res here and see what happens. Okay. There we go. We got, oh, look at this. We got our rows and then we got undefined. Let's make it more clear. Let's actually add some code because, you know, I like doing this to see what's going on. We're actually going to add the word then here. There, let's add that here. Let's add that here too. So we can really see what's going on. There, okay. Let's run this again. Well, there's my first then, and then I got undefined. And as I mentioned, anything you return from a .then becomes available to the next .then as the res. So, and at some point out just quickly, oh, because it then isn't returning anything. That's correct. What does console.log return? In fact, let's return console.log. Let's try that. Let's return something. Let's try it again. It's still undefined. Okay, well, what does console.log return? Anyone? What does it, if I do console log returns undefined? Yes, it returns undefined. So in fact, we did return something. We returned a nothing. Nothing is correct. Of course, the JavaScript word for nothing or have no idea is undefined. So we did in fact return undefined. We returned whatever console log returned, which is undefined. We passed that along to our next then, and we got that. Here's something else. Instead of returning the console log, let's return 5. There, return 5 from our promise. What do you think we'll get now? We get 5 because we returned something from our .then. So whatever you return from the .then ends up as the next res in the then chain. This takes a bit of getting used to with promises, but it does become second nature after a while. Just whatever gets returned there becomes the res in the next then in the chain. Once again, I'm chaining .thens together. Okay. Any questions so far on this one? So, for example, I can add another .then. There's always another .then. Always. So I could just copy that. There we go.
Gary, I could be wrong here. I just wanted to ask, is it line 23 that's logging the 5 because it's then stored in the next promise?
Yeah, good question. Let's make it more clear. We'll go then 1,
okay,
then 2, yeah, and then 3. Sounds like Dr. Seuss, doesn't it? Thing 1, thing 2, thing 3. Okay, all right. So let's try it. So now we're running our promise, which is our get widgets. We're doing then 1 on that. And we can even take out the word promise because we don't need to do that, do we? We can just go have that and just say, we can say get widgets dot then, really, because we don't need that temporary promise thing, do we? There we go. Get widgets dot then. Same thing, just no variable. So get widgets dot then. So whatever that get widgets returned is going to end up as my res there. Okay, and it returned a promise. So it's a resolve promise because that's when then fires, which means res is going to be whatever PG gives me. Let's see what happens here. And of course I get 1, my rows, return 5. 2, my next then, the res from my previous, that's the 5. And the 3, of course, I get whatever console log returns, which is nothing. And I could, of course, return, just to be safe, let's turn that, return, there. And I get undefined. Okay, so real important point. Whatever is returned from the then is available to the next then in the chain. And we took advantage of that in our PG this week, our project. And this is what we did. Remember this pool.query? We didn't quite do that, did we? We did something a little different. We actually did a dot then on here, didn't we? We did a dot then with call it res again. And what we did was we returned res.rows there, didn't we? We actually took care of the detail of the rows. So now this just gets res, which is great because now I don't need to know the gory details of how get widgets figured out how to give me res.rows, because now I'm returning res.rows. So I'm basically parsing the response from PG because this function deals with all the PG stuff. When I call get widgets, I don't really want to know, and I don't really care that it's using PG. It's not really my problem. You'll hear this concept of separation of concerns in, it's not just usually JavaScript, it's really every object-oriented program is called separation of concerns. But I like to call it, that's not my problem. Really, that's what it means. That's not my problem. So get widgets in my main code here It's calling getWidgets. How does getWidgets do it? Everyone? That's not my problem. It's not my job. Exactly. That's your problem, not my problem. And as we all know, the best kind of problem to have is not my problem. Or even better, somebody else's problem. So if you see something, how can you make this somebody else's problem? We'll do this later on in React in a week and a bit. So, all right, not my problem. So getWidgets will do its thing, and I'll get back a res, and I'm hoping I'm going to get back exactly what I want. I want to get back an array of my objects. How getWidgets did that, I don't care. Now, of course, when I'm inside getWidgets, I change my hat. I'm in my getWidgets mode. I need to know I'm using PG, and I'm going to return rows. So now getWidgets should hopefully give me a res with what I want. And it did. So now this is my res now. So I've really what's called abstracted out all the PG stuff. And I just get back what I want because I did it then. Remember, a then, whatever it returns, is available to the next then. Now the next then happens to be someplace else, outside this function. Doesn't matter because it's still, I'm still returning the dot then. So getWidgets dot then, whatever getWidgets return, it returns what? It returns, well, a dot then. So I'm really in effect chaining these two thens just outside of functions. We will do a lot of this in React. Come Friday, I want you to remember this, okay? Please. On Friday of React Week, remember that you can dot then something and then return it. Or whatever you return from the function makes that function a promise function. So if I return a promise from getWidgets, my getWidgets is now thenable. There is a situation on Friday where you think, oh, if only this function was thenable, my problems would be solved. It's like, well, let's look at it. Let's make this function thenable. Let's return a promise. Yes, so question is, are there many use cases other than things from res? Should I just think of PG as, well, no, there's tons of stuff in res. There's tons of cool stuff in res. Let's look at res. Yeah, that's actually, it's really cool. For example, all the fields. Let's say you're writing a little database program, like a little database GUI, where you want to make it totally flexible, can handle any database. Well, now you can list out all the fields, right? Look, see? And all the column names. So a lot of other cool stuff you can get out of here. In reality, nah, we use rows. Okay, almost all the time we use rows. But there are some cool things that you can use doing more advanced stuff using the res. But in reality, yeah, we just use rows. Okay, so just like that. Okay, but remember, PG is not the only promise thing there is, and I'm going to get that in a few minutes. So, all right, let's just abstract our getWidgets away out of here, shall we? I'm going to keep it up top. Let's scroll up here. So we'll assume we have a getWidgets there. That's all our code. So we'll assume getWidgets works. It now returns res.rows. So what if something goes wrong, right? That's the big problem. What if something goes wrong in a promise? Because promises aren't always kept, sadly. Okay, easy to make promises, but not always good to keep them. So sometimes they're broken promises. We call that, of course, rejected promises. Mess something up here. Let's say, I don't know, we'll just give it some really nasty SQL. How's that? All right. So now when I call getWidgets, let's watch what happens. Ooh, unhandled promise rejection warning. Has anybody not seen that yet? Really? Seriously? We all see this one. It's the good old UPRW, unhandled promise rejection warning. We see this all the time. Of course, we haven't handled the rejection. Anybody know what we used to handle rejection with? No, I mean, anybody? Yes, catch, exactly. We use a catch. A catch does handle rejection for us. Okay, it is hard. And with promises, you got to be able to handle rejection because it happens a lot. It's just one of those things. That's promises, man. So, all right. It is a catch, and a catch looks a lot like a then, really. We just give it a different name and a different, we usually call it error. You know, call it anything you want really, but we call it error. Okay, error. And let's just console log the error. Well, now we're going to call this catch. We'll say the catch gave me an error. There we go. Okay, now I'm doing a catch on my promise. So we got a dot then and a dot catch. Let's watch what happens now. Okay, this actually is my catch. So I got a lot of stuff. Like that's a lot of stuff. Wow. I can grab something useful out of that. I mean, what can I use out of here? This is actually a stack trace, not that accessible, believe it or not. Nice, because that'd be a nice one to grab, but that's actually not easy to grab. With some code you can, but so we'll just grab like code. Yeah, that's error.code. We'll grab code. Okay, let's run this again. And great, a good old 42601. Incredibly obvious what that means. It means invalid syntax. Okay, so we got an error, but at least we handle it gracefully, and that's useful. It didn't just crash on us. We got a useful error, and we can now carry on. Now, here's a cool thing about catch. Now let's do another then after this catch. Let's just, yeah, there we go. Let's grab that one. Do a then. And we'll call this then 2 now. And res, sure. Okay, let's watch our catch now. We got a catch, we got a then again. What's with that? We got undefined. Well, that's cool. What if I did this? Return 5 again. What do we think is going to happen? Well, quickly, for absolutely no dollars, what's going to happen in my then 2? Get a 5? We get a 5. So not only does anything you return from a then end up in the next then, as it turns out, whatever you return from a catch also ends up in the next then. It returns a promise, essentially. Catch and then return a promise. By the way, if you ever get asked in an interview, what does a then and a catch return? Returns a promise. I used this question. I was doing interviews the last 4 months for like forever, asking people, and that was one of the questions I asked. And this is like for senior intermediate positions, of course. What does it catch and then return? And some guys got it, and most people didn't. It returns a promise. It returns a thenable, which essentially is a promise. How do you end a promise? Yeah, like goes on forever. Like, if I did it again, you're right. That's a good question. Let's keep on thenning it. Like, let's go forever. It's like, whoa, keeps on going. It never stops. It doesn't stop. How do you end the promise? Just stop writing thens. Really, just stop writing thens. So return value, yes, it is. Well, not okay. So the error is the return value from the return of the then that caused the error. Yes, it's from the catch. So error is in fact the error that was thrown. It was the reject. Remember when we had to build our own promises? God, those are hard. We had to build our own promises with resolve reject, and you had to go reject bracket stuff. That's what got ending. That's what ends up in my error. Now, once again, we don't write a lot of promises, thank goodness, because they are hard. But inside, that's what happens. The resolve goes resolve bracket stuff. That's what we get in the then. And when you go reject, you get that. Why would you want to put a catch in a series of thens? Good question. We'll get to that a little later. But yes. Okay, can you start a new promise and then catch on it instead? Yes, you can too. In fact, let's talk a bit about catch. Wow. Can we use then error? We can. It's just a name. I can call then my dog's name. A little dog, Bruno. Yeah, I go then Bruno. Sure. Works the same. Doesn't matter. No difference. Okay, of course, my then didn't fire. Notice my then did not fire because my catch caught the error. Cool. Let's fix our nasty error there. We get our stuff. Let's try something else. Here is a really interesting thing for us promise nerds about catch. Let's do something else here. Let's make a mistake in our then, okay? Let's try that. Let's go res. There, okay, got my res. I think I got a bug there. Let's see what happens here. Put out an error right there. Let's take a look. And I'll get rid of these extra thens for now. Okay, there we go. Let's see what happens here. Oh, well, look at that. That's obviously an error. I forgot I have an invalid variable name, doesn't exist, but my catch caught that. Now that's cool. Not only did my catch errors in my actual promise, it caught an actual JavaScript error as well. It's like, wow, that's kind of cool. So if I did, res dot or Bruno dot, rows there, that's a nasty error. Bruno's undefined. And if I go undefined dot something, it's really not going to work, is it? See what happens. Oh, Bruno's not defined. It handled it gracefully. That's kind of cool. So not only does a catch handle the errors in the promise, it handles any error above it. So if I give it nasty JavaScript here, it will catch those errors too. That's a useful point to know, because sometimes your query may be fine and you go, why am I getting an error? What's going on? It's catching. Well, the problem might not be in your promise. It might have just been some silly mistake, like maybe a null, an undefined right there. It's like, oh yeah, it was res, of course, there, res.rows. But once again, res.rows, let's see, that's an error. Undefined, of course. Res rows is undefined. So what if I go res here? Like that. Not defined. So it catches any error above it. Okay. And back to res. Okay. So there's catch. Interesting to remember, it does catch kind of all your sins, not just the sins of the promise, okay? It catches anything you do above it. All right. So we should back to normal again. There we go. Got our stuff. One more thing, we'll deal with the basics of promises, and then we're going to move on to something more interesting, because databases are like really cool for like database guys, but for the rest of us, they're kind of boring. Okay, we'll do something more fun. So there's one more operator we use on promises. Anyone know what that last one is? We use then, and we use catch. There's a third one, also my interview question, by the way, for the last 4 months, so that no one can answer. There's a third one we can use. I have then, we have dot catch, and dot resolve. There is a dot resolve, but that's actually a capital pre-promise dot resolve, which we literally will never use like this. And yes, I know you've seen this in Compass. Ignore it, okay? Don't go doing that. They do that as an example. And if you see this in Compass again, don't do that, okay? It's an example. So we see that very often. Okay, let's take a look. Dot all, dot throw, dot resolve, all really good choices. But the one we're interested in is finally. There is a dot finally. And by the way, these terms are not unique to JavaScript. Finally, catch and inside a promise or a block is used in other languages as well. In Java, it's used a lot. Catch finally. It's actually called try catch finally. So this is a then catch finally, but same kind of thing. So these concepts are not unique to JavaScript. Catch the error finally. Finally is done, well, like the word suggests, finally. So yeah, finally we're getting to finally. Yes, it is finally. It takes a callback, no parameters this time, no parameters. There. All right. And finally is actually, since we're using databases, this is one of the cases where it actually is very useful for databases. Certainly in a program like this is a console program. It's not a web server. It's just code. So I run it. But you notice it's hanging here. It's like, oh, waiting, waiting, still waiting. It'll eventually time out. What's happened is, there it is, gone. I've created a pool, okay? And PG made a pool for me. Great. He said, okay, here's a pool. You can use it. It's got connections. You can, add and use connections, close them again, all kinds of cool stuff. And I ran a query on that pool. But the pool is still around. It's hanging around because JavaScript knows, well, I got this pool and you do queries on it. It held that pool open for a while until it actually timed out. There's actually another parameter here. It's called timeout and stuff like that. And you can tell the pool, okay, if you don't receive anything, any requests for so long, then you can die. It has default, what was that? Time it, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm counting on 10. 10. It was 10? I think it was 10. Looks like time was 10 seconds. But that was annoying. Like, so I can use that. Oh, so here we go. What's the difference with done? Done, that's Ajax in jQuery, remember? That's Ajax. So we use done in jQuery's Ajax call. Although we generally now use promises too in Ajax in jQuery as well. So, okay. So the requests, you can die, yes. So, but finally is useful in instances like this. Finally is often used as a cleanup. We can use to clean up after ourselves. For example, finally, I want to do something when I'm done. Maybe close the pool, like end the pool. Otherwise, I get that 10-second delay. It's like it's just sitting there doing nothing. So I really would like to clean up, whether or not it fails or not. Maybe it failed, but I still want to clean up the pool. So that's where finally comes in. Finally will happen regardless. Or I've heard the word irregardless. There's no such word, okay? Regardless. Finally will happen regardless of catch or then. It happens every time. So I want to clean up the pool. So I'll go pool, I think it's dot, let's try it, end. Pool dot end. There. In fact, let's console log finally just to know that we got to our finally. There we go. Finally. With an exclamation mark. Finally. There we go. Okay. Go pool.end. Here's my pool. Pool.end. I'm pretty sure it's end. We'll find out. I haven't got a catch after that. You never know. Let's take a look. All right. And look at that. Finally, immediately returned. My pool closed. So great. I know my finally worked. Let's test that my finally works in case of an error. Let's give it some nasty JavaScript error right there. Okay. So my catch is going to catch, but hopefully my finally will still work. Will still catch. And yes, it did. Okay. So if you don't request, yeah, I can die now. Okay. Okay. So there's finally. So then catch finally. Great interview questions, by the way, if someone asks you in an interview. What are the 3 parts of a promise? Then catch finally. And what do then and catch return? They return promises. Does finally have a then catch? Let's take a look. Good question. What does finally return? Let's take a look. We'll go dot then. Let's just do this. There. And we'll just console log. Oh, we'll do a then. Sorry, grab a then instead. Put a then after that. There. Then, and we'll console log res. Console log, then finally. There. Finally, and we'll get rid of our silly error there. Okay, so now we've got then catch. Probably gonna do that, but because we catch this then, we're gonna go to finally, and we're gonna see what the finally returns. That's interesting. What do we get back? But let's return something, just to turn, 999, so we know we're actually returning something from the finally. Let's take a look. Place your bets. Table's closed in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, 99. Let's take a look. Let's take a look. Then finally, let's take a look. Oh, return 5. Let's take a look. Then finally, 5. That's interesting. That's interesting. What happened? Yeah, huh? I know. Pretty cool, huh? That's interesting. Let's do something else. We returned 5 from our then. So interesting. Let's make sure that doesn't return anything. Just make sure we didn't interfere. We only have 1, 5. In fact, let's make our catch return 15. Maybe we made a mistake. Let's take a look here. Finally, look at that. That's kind of cool. Okay, let's be totally clear. Let's return the res. Like, come on. What's going on here? Res. That's that res. What's going on here? We returned res. Okay. It doesn't, you don't get to use the return from finally. You simply inherit the previous thing, that or that. Let's do our catch. Let's just make a nasty one here. And you get 15. We get the error, of course, but you get 15. One of the quirks, okay? You're not normally going to worry about this so much, so don't worry too much about it. But so yes, a finally does return a promise, but you kind of get the previous res again. It's kind of cool. Right. Anyway, enough on that. Of the abstract, weird theory of promises. Let's do some more fun things. Okay. Let's do, we've done a bit of promise. Let's do something without doing databases. How about doing some stuff outside databases, okay? Let me try something here. I'm going to make a call. Let's open a new file here. We're going to use a library called Axios. This is something we use a lot. Const. We require it. Say Axios. Axios is a very popular, wire Axios. So Axios. Very popular HTTP library, kind of like Ajax for Node, right? But of course, Ajax is jQuery, and we're not in jQuery, of course. And later on, when we React, we're also not in jQuery. We have to use something else. We use Axios, which is way easier to use than Ajax. Way easier. I'm going to show you right now. Okay, let's try something. Let's do like an Axios call. We need to get a const. Going to get a URL. And it could be anything. Just any website I want to go and get stuff from. Make one up. HTTPS : I don't know, Gary.com or API.Gary.com or Kanye.rest. There we go. API.Kanye.rest. Okay. And to use Axios, it's actually very, very simple. All you do is you simply call Axios directly. You say Axios.get, and it will get you what you want, just like that. Let's try that. It'll be Axios.get. So Axios dot, like Ajax, dot get. There. And I'm going to give my URL. URL. And that is how you use Axios. It is very, very simple. It returns a promise. So I'm going to then that Axios dot then. And I get a res. And I'm going to, let's log my res, see what I get. Res. There we go. There is an Axios call. It's actually a lot simpler than using Ajax. Dot get URL dot then get your stuff. Let's run this and see what happens. Let's go index.js and see if I've made any mistakes. Whoa, I got something back. This is an Axios res object. It is really big. It's got a lot of stuff in it. So I don't encourage you to console log res. You'll do it once, and that's kind of it. So don't go console logging.res. So, but it's got something in it. I happen to know this. Why? Because I read the Axios docs. It's, remember PG, it's res.rows. Well, here it's res.data. That is the body. So res.data in the Axios world is the actual thing that you said. It's the body of the query. So that's what I'm going to get back from Kanye here. going to get back res.data. Let's give that a try. Okay. There we go. Ah, I got a quote back from Kanye.rest. Let's run it again. People only get jealous when they care. George Bush doesn't care. That's right. Keep squares out of your circle. I feel like I'm too busy writing history to read it. Oh, wow. What can you say? Like, it's just awesome. I could read these all day. I feel calm but energized. My memories are from the future. Look at that. The guy is the poet laureate of our time. He really is. He's an amazing wordsmith. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. They tried to talk about it. Yeah. You showed them. Really. He showed them. Yes, that's right. My biggest regret in life is I will never be able to see myself perform live. Look at that. Awesome stuff. If I got any cooler, I would freeze to death. Aren't promises great? This is awesome stuff. This is great. Okay, let's carry on. Let's actually go ahead and add our beginning code, end of code stuff so we see our promises going. I like doing that because it's kind of fun. Log that. I'm going to go start of my code, start of code, my code. I'll do the end of my code because I like to see where I'm ending. This reminds me that I'm always working on promises. There we go. Chuck Norris API. There's a bunch of them. When I do the, which one? I'm going to do probably on the Thursday of React Week. I'll do a real cool one with promises. And I've got a bunch of them I can use. Got the Office. That's cool. I've got, Ron Swanson. Anybody heard any Ron Swanson APIs? Yes. Cool. So I've got a bunch of them. We'll do them all at once, kind of run them all at the same time. Okay. Let's do one more. There we go. So here's a quote. Okay, so I'm noticing, I'm looking at this API. It's giving back an object with a thing called quote inside it. Now, I may not have seen this API before. Okay. Actually, I have. But if I hadn't, this guy is going to kind of tell me, well, look, I'm getting this dot quote. So why not res.data dot quote? So let's break this down. Res, that's promises. I got a res back. So the res, that comes from promises. The dot data thing, that's Axios, right? Like PG is dot rows, Axios is dot data. The quote thing, where's that come from? Who does that come from? That's Kanye. He is sending me that, right? So promises gives me my res, because I called it res. Data came from Axios, but that quote thing, that came from Kanye. So if I run it again, I'm going to get the quote, and I got the quote. I still think I am the greatest. He does. Awesome. Okay, so let's do the same thing. Let's do a catch. Let's say we screw something up. Dot catch. There we go. And error. And there we go. And we'll log our error. Error. I'm not sure what an Axios error returns. Let's make a mistake though. Let's just, there, mess up our URL. Our catch is probably going to fire. Let's see what we get back. Why did I just type log? Oh, huh. For those of you that have me as a mentor, you probably know that you can do that. There's a few shortcuts, L, O, G, and pick the second one, hit enter, and now it remembers that. L-O-G, see? So now I should go L-O-G, hit enter, and I get console log. Pretty cool. For the rest of your life, you've just saved yourself how many millions of finger keystrokes over your lifetime? Lots of other cool stuff. I have Emmet turned on as well. For example, you can do this, FN, function, foo, tab, param. Whoops, there. Real cool things you could do in VS Code. Maybe one day I'll hold a VS Code thing for tricks in VS Code. Okay, we messed up our Kanye.rest. Now it's Kanye.rest. Okay, I should get a res or an error back from Axios. Let's take a look and, oh, yes, the error is also really big. Like, wow, that's a lot of stuff. What can I use out of here? error no. That's kind of useful. Not found. Okay. I think I'll go with that. I'll get the error no. Why? Because I looked it up. I took a look. I didn't know. It's like error no. Or code maybe. Code too. Sure. Maybe code. Let's run it again. And we got not found, which is true. It's not found. So Kanye.rest. Kanye.rest. The media tries to kill our heroes one at a time, don't they though? We have to evolve. Okay, let's chain some Kanye. Okay, we'll do it like the Kanye like chain. That sounds right. Kanye chains. Okay, all right. Let's do a couple more Kanyes. So we want to pass another promise inside our dot then. So far, we're just doing one promise and like chaining other stuff. Let's chain two promises together. Okay, so when we could, if we wanted to, just put it inside here, put an axios.get inside here. But then we have to do this. We have to do a dot then here, and do this and res, console.res, res.data.quote. Let's take a look, and that might work. Let's see, why not? Let's take a look. Okay, there we go. All right. So I have chained two promises, but it's not the prettiest. Like this is like callbacks. This is, how does it help me? Like I really haven't gained anything. I've still got, I know another one. I got to do it inside here again, don't I? I mean, I could do another promise, but now I got to do it inside the then again. This isn't helping me, is it? So I've done 3 Kanyes, but this isn't looking a lot like callback hell, isn't it? All right, if I'm doing 3 Kanyes, I'm probably doing it right. So I got 3 Kanyes. I just need, yes, sometimes you just need your own elevator. That is true. Well, anyway, I got 3 Kanyes, but like, this doesn't look so great, doesn't it? It does not look so great. So remember we talked earlier, if there's a better way, if whatever I return from the dot then becomes available to the next dot then. So instead of doing this, I can simply call it again and simply say return res axios.url. And that's the same question. If it was a function, in this case, I'm returning axios.get from the dot then. And now it is available to the next dot then in the chain. Let's take it again. So I can take that and there's my dot then. In fact, let's just console log our little, we'll call it then 1 and we'll call it then 2. Just so we keep track of all our thens. And we'll call this our catch too. There. There, okay. All right, let's run it again. Now I've got 2 of them. Actually, I'm calling a little bit. I'm only gonna call 2. I'm calling 3, but only thenning 2 of them. So, okay, there we go. Then 1, We'll Cure Hunger, and I channel Will Pharaoh. Awesome. Let's add one more then at the end, and we'll actually grab we won't return another query. There we go. Now we are chaining 3, oops, there. Okay, we are chaining 3 promises. First promise, dot then. It returns a promise from its dot then, which means this promise is available to the next dot then, and now it's all nicely lined up like that. Okay, dot then, and no indenting callback hill, or in this case, promise hill. Let's see if it works. 1, 2, 3. Well, I called it 2. There. 1, 2, 3. There we go. And there we go. Like you said, my greatest pain in life is that I will never ever be able to see myself perform live. Awesome. Okay. I haven't seen this Taylor Swift quote yet. That's a real fun one. So, okay. Thank goodness. Okay. So that's promises for chaining promises. Okay. Any questions so far on this one? we're chaining promise. Remember, we could do a got catch. And let's say I made a mistake in here. Once again, if I just totally messed up my code, what's going to happen now? I now have an error in here. So what is going to happen? I have a JavaScript error in here. What am I going to get here? Okay, we're on the wrong one. Look at that. I got undefined. So let's go there. Error. Look at that. I could not read properly quote of undefined. It caught this error. This one was fine. It fired that then. Then it did the second axis.get. Another then fired. Got that. Tried to console log this, but oh, we got a JavaScript error there. Blew up, trickled all the way down. This is what happens. It actually trickles all the way down until it gets caught. That's why they call these things catch. The error kind of percolates downwards until I catch it. If there's no catch, it spews off the end, and JavaScript goes, unhandled, error promise rejection. What are you doing? So that's how these things work. The errors will trickle down until it finds a catch. Okay, let's try something else here. One more thing about catch, and this is kind of cool. If I have a function that does a catch, once you catch something, it's caught. Okay, you're not going to catch it again. So sounds kind of cool. Once you catch something, it's been caught, you can't catch it again. Hey, cool. That is true in many ways in life. So I got another catch here. So let's go catch 1 and catch 2. That's a Kanye quote. I think it is. I think it is a Kanye quote. Okay. One of these, I'm waiting to get the Gary stop abusing my site quote from Kanye one of these days. So, okay, because I use them a lot. Okay, let's try this. Now I've got an error right there. Okay, so this error should trickle down until this catch catches it. Let's see what happens. And, oh, come on, wrong one. There we go. And yes, my first one ran. My catch caught it, but not this catch. It's been caught. You can't catch it again, really, unless you do something. But what if you have a function where you want to do something, and catch it, but then have the program or the code that called your function still be able to get a catch and also do something with that catch, because you want to pass along the fact that an error happened. Well, that's kind of cool. Let's try that. Let's make a function. We'll embed our Kanye instead of function now. So we'll just embed all this stuff inside a function. There we go. Axis.get. And here we go. There we go. We'll do a dot then. Here we go. We're going to return the axis.get. No, we're going to return the res.data. Quote. So now I have a function we've kind of encapsulated. Oh, hold on. Get Kanye. Get Kanye. Okay. Now I have a function that returns a promise. No, it doesn't. Not yet. Now it does. Okay. So I have a promise that returns, or a function that returns a promise. It returns, if all works, my quote. Let's see if it works. So now I'm going to go get Kanye. Get Kanye. Just like that. I'll clean this up. So now I just need a res, don't I? Because I've already abstracted that away. I've said return a res.quote, which means the next then in the chain, which is this one, is just going to get a res. So let's just console log res, just like that. And we don't need these reses here. But we do want to catch if there's an error. There. How's that looking? It's not so bad. Let's give it a try. So this should give me one Kanye. I should get a single Kanye back. Where'd it go? Okay. Okay. Oh, not defined. Cost URL. Oh, of course. There. Okay. Try it again. Okay. Style is still genderless. Yes, it is. It really is. Okay, catch one. There we go. So we're still working now. Look at this. Yes, people tell you to be humble, but be amazing, be great, be awesome, be awesome. Cool. Okay, so now we have a function that I wrote returns a promise. But what if I want to do something with the error here? Okay, I want to do something here. Catch, just console log the error. Sure, because maybe on my server I want to see there's an error happening. So I want to console log error. Log the error. Code. Okay. Oops. And okay. So I want to log the error code. Great. And it did. Well, let me make an error first. So there we go. Not found. And then one caught it undefined, which means it didn't return anything, right? So my then didn't catch anything. So two things I can do. Okay, I could return error.code. That works, right? That'll work. And I get in my then error not found. And that's kind of useful. But what happens if I'm returning just res.data from here? And now I want to actually do res.quote here. It's like, oh, wait a second. What's going to happen here? Undefined. There is no res.quote because my error returned error.code. Okay. So while you can do it this way, and for simplicity, you can do it for now. I'll show you a quick way to do it, but it's a little more advanced, and we don't do this till like the last day in React. You can actually have it catch again. So what do I have? My error con kfoundye.rest, and I've got the wrong URL. I'm going to get the error not found. I return error.code, which may be good enough. I could, I suppose, make an object, couldn't I? And make them look the same. I could return, an object here with, the quote, like that. That's fine. So now I'm returning an object from there, and maybe return an object here with the error, like this, and no quote. Oh, res undefined. Line 15. Of course. Error. There. This error.code. There. This also works. So now I'm giving an object. So I could, if error is there, you can handle it here. You could say, error not found. Great. So now, kind of doing it okay. I kind of can say, well, if I've got an error here, if I have an error, print out the error, otherwise print out the res. There's another way that is really the preferred way to do this kind of thing. That is to, instead of going to all this trouble, you can simply what's called rethrow the error. You can throw the error again. It's up in the air, which means this error is up in the air, which means someone's got to catch it again. You've now thrown an error. You got the error, you read it, you printed it, you threw it back up again. Okay, well, someone's got to catch that error. So Kanye will catch it, yes. So now I want to be able to have my get Kanye function give me a catch if something happens. That way I can keep my then clean. That's really useful because I don't have to go to the trouble of like, well, was it an error in the then or was it not an error? Like, where did I get back? I don't know. Well, now I can know. I can do a throw, which really is just a throw. There. And how do we do a throw? We can go throw new, just error, it's built in. New error. Oops. Error. Oops, I think it's like this. And you can say, oops, like that. So we got it right. Oops, there we go. My catch caught it. So I handled the error here, right there, and then I threw it back up again, or I guess threw it down again, depending on how you look at it. I threw it up, and which means now it's up for grabs again, which means I'd better handle it here. Okay. A little more advanced, but that's, if you need to do that sometimes, if you need to have your function really report back to your caller what happened, but still do something with it. It's kind of handy. Okay. That's kind of the basics of promise, with a little bit of a deeper dive into some cool stuff. Takeaways are anything you return from a then is what? It's available to the next then in the chain. Anything you return from a catch is also available to the next then in the chain. We have then, catch, and finally. Finally is very useful. And we can do cool things with things like throw if you want to rethrow an error, for instance, even the same error, I suppose. We don't normally do this because my get Kanye is like a function that's protecting me from all that stuff. So now I don't need to know anything about Axios here, do I? Nothing at all. No error knows. This is taking care of all the Axios stuff. So this could be, I could replace this easily with something else, like a fetch library or some other library, and my users would not care because they're going to get back things they expect. They're going to get back oops regardless. All right. Okay, everyone, I'll let you go. I was a little late, but thanks for showing up for promises. All right. Okay, everyone, have a great weekend. See you guys later.